The massive Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a dark storm cloud blocking out the stars. 500 ships of various sizes spread across space in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the metallic blue that marked them as vessels of the Galactic Empire. At the center of this armada sat the flagship Dominion's Wrath, a vessel so large that entire cities could fit within its hull. Admiral Kane Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, his forearms crossed behind his back as he gazed at the primitive star system before him. The Zephyrians had conquered over 12,000 worlds in their march across the galaxy, and each victory had been swift and absolute. These humans would be no different. Morrison's scaled face showed the confidence of a predator who had never met an equal. The bridge crew worked quietly around him, their movements precise and efficient. They had done this many times before. First came the show of force, then the ultimatum, then the inevitable surrender or destruction. Morrison preferred surrender as it meant more slaves for the Empire's endless construction projects. Communications officer. Morrison called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. Open a channel to the human fleet. The officer's clawed fingers danced across his console. Channel open. Admiral Morrison stepped forward toward the main screen. The humans had only 50 ships scattered throughout their system, most of them clustered around their home planet. The largest of their vessels was barely a tenth the size of his smallest destroyer. It would almost be embarrassing to destroy such a pathetic force. Attention human fleet, Morrison began, his voice broadcast across all frequencies. I am Admiral Kane Morrison of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. You have been found guilty of existing in space claimed by the Empire. You have exactly 72 standard hours to surrender unconditionally. Disarm your vessels, prepare your population for relocation, and submit to Imperial authority. The response came from the human flagship, a ship they called New Horizon. The being who appeared on screen was clearly female, with short gray hair and calm blue eyes. She wore a simple blue uniform with stars on her collar. Morrison had expected fear or anger, but instead he saw something that puzzled him. The human was smiling. Admiral Morrison, the human said, her voice steady and clear. I am Fleet Admiral Claire Watson of the Terran Federation. We have received your message and appreciate you taking the time to deliver it personally. Morrison waited for the fear, the desperate pleas, the offers of tribute that usually followed his ultimatums. Instead, the human continued speaking in that same calm tone. We will need some time to prepare our response, Watson said. 72 hours should be sufficient. We look forward to speaking with you again when the deadline expires. The transmission ended, leaving Morrison staring at a blank screen. In 300 years of conquest, no species had ever responded to his ultimatum with such calm indifference. His intelligence officer, Subcommander Vrex, approached with his report tablet. Admiral, our scans show the human fleet is making minimal defensive preparations, Vrex reported, his voice showing his own confusion. They appear to be conducting routine maintenance and system diagnostics. Several ships are playing what our computers identify as music across their communication channels. Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display. The human ships were indeed moving, but not in any defensive pattern he recognized. If anything, they seemed to be organizing themselves for some kind of parade formation. It made no tactical sense. On the bridge of the human cruiser Liberty's Edge, Captain Lucas Bryant leaned back in his command chair and chuckled softly. His crew exchanged glances, and several of them had to cover their mouths to hide their own amusement. The alien admiral's speech had been almost exactly what their intelligence reports had predicted. Captain, his communications officer reported, Fleet Admiral Watson is requesting a conference with all ship commanders in 30 minutes. Understood, Bryant replied, still smiling. Make sure our friends out there can monitor the conference. Let them think they're being clever. Throughout the human fleet, similar scenes were playing out. On the Star Runner, Commander Maya Johnson reviewed the tactical data while her crew performed what looked like standard pre-battle checks. In reality, they were bringing online systems that had been carefully hidden for exactly this type of encounter. Captain Ryan Peters of the Iron Wolf studied the Zephyrian formation through his ship's sensors. The aliens had positioned themselves exactly as their tactical manuals suggested, a textbook deployment designed to overwhelm through superior numbers and firepower. It was almost disappointing how predictable they were, sir, his tactical officer reported. The aliens are conducting deep scans of our hull configurations. They seem particularly interested in our weapon systems, Peters nodded. Let them scan all they want. Make sure the decoy emitters are running at full power. I want them to see exactly what we want them to see. The Zephyrian scans showed human ships equipped with primitive kinetic weapons and basic energy shields. The power signatures indicated fusion reactors that were barely adequate for interstellar travel. By every measure that mattered to the Empire, the human fleet was centuries behind Zephyrian technology. Admiral Morrison called his own staff meeting to review the intelligence reports. His tactical officers confirmed what the scans had shown. The humans possessed no weapons capable of penetrating Zephyrian armor, no shields strong enough to stop Imperial plasma cannons, and no engines fast enough to escape the coming battle. Admiral, his chief science officer reported. Our analysis indicates the human fleet could be destroyed in approximately 4 minutes once hostilities begin. Their largest vessels would require 2 direct hits from our main batteries. Their smaller ships would be vaporized by single shots from our secondary weapons. Morrison nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. Prepare firing solutions for all human vessels. When the deadline expires, I want them to understand the full weight of Imperial power before they die. What the Zephyrians did not know was that every conversation, every scan, every tactical analysis was being monitored and recorded by the human fleet. The aliens' confidence in their technological superiority was exactly what Fleet Admiral Watson had been counting on the bridge of New Horizon. Watson reviewed the final reports from her ship commanders. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The Zephyrians were seeing exactly what they expected to see, and their arrogance was blinding them to the truth. Communications, Watson ordered. Send a fleet-wide message on the music channel. Let's give our guests something to listen to while they wait. Across the human fleet, speakers crackled to life with an old Earth song about standing up to bullies and fighting against impossible odds. The aliens monitoring human communications assumed it was some primitive ritual designed to boost morale before their inevitable defeat. Admiral Morrison listened to the human music with growing irritation. These primitives actually seemed to believe they could resist the might of the Galactic Empire. Their ignorance would make their destruction all the more satisfying. The 72-hour countdown had begun, and both fleets settled in to wait. The Zephyrians spent their time running simulation after simulation, each one confirming their absolute superiority. The humans spent their time making final preparations that looked like nothing more than routine maintenance to alien observers. Neither fleet slept during those 3 days, but for very different reasons. The Zephyrians stayed awake in anticipation of an easy victory. The humans stayed awake because they knew that in 72 hours, the galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about underestimating humanity. 24 hours had passed since Admiral Morrison delivered his ultimatum to the human fleet. The Zephyrian commander stood in his private quarters aboard the Dominion's Wrath, studying the tactical reports that grew more puzzling with each passing hour. The humans were behaving in ways that defied every pattern the Empire had observed in 3 centuries of conquest. Sub-Commander Vrex entered the Admiral's quarters carrying a data tablet filled with intercepted human communications. His expression showed the same confusion that had been spreading through the Zephyrian fleet since their arrival. Admiral, the humans continued to baffle our analysts, Vrex reported, his scaled fingers tapping nervously against the tablet. They are conducting what appears to be routine fleet exercises. Our sensors detect no panic, no desperate preparations for battle, no attempts to evacuate their civilian population. Morrison turned from the viewport where he had been watching the distant human ships. Perhaps they are simply too primitive to understand the gravity of their situation. That is what we initially believed, Sir, but the evidence suggests otherwise, Vrex continued. Their fleet communications are highly organized and efficient. They are using encryption methods that took our computers several hours to break. These are not the actions of a primitive species. The Admiral took the tablet and scrolled through the intercepted messages. The humans were indeed behaving strangely. Instead of frantic war preparations, they seemed to be conducting normal fleet operations. Ships were rotating crews, running system diagnostics, and even conducting what appeared to be training exercises meanwhile. Aboard the human flagship New Horizon, Fleet Admiral Watson was hosting a conference with her senior commanders. The holographic images of her captains filled the briefing room. Each one connected from their respective ships scattered throughout the system. Captain Ryan Peters of the Iron Wolf spoke first, his weathered face showing the kind of calm confidence that came from decades of military service. Admiral, our passive sensors indicate the Zephyrians are exactly where we expected them to be. Their formation is textbook Imperial doctrine, designed for maximum intimidation rather than tactical efficiency. Commander Beth Collins of the Stormchaser nodded in agreement. Their ships are maintaining parade formation rather than combat spacing. They're so confident in their superiority that they're not even bothering with proper defensive positions. Captain Nick Sullivan of the Valiant Dawn pulled up a tactical display showing the alien fleet. Our intelligence was accurate. They're using the same tactics they've employed in every conquest for the past 300 years. No innovation, no adaptation, just overwhelming force applied in predictable patterns. Watson smiled as she listened to her officers' reports. Everything was proceeding exactly as the Terran Defense Council had planned. The Zephyrians were seeing what they expected to see, and their arrogance was preventing them from asking the right questions. What about their scanning attempts? Watson asked. Captain Lucas Bryant of the Liberty's Edge responded immediately. They've conducted 17 detailed scans of our hull configurations and weapon systems. Each time they see exactly what our decoy emitters want them to see. As far as they know, we're equipped with primitive kinetic weapons and basic fusion reactors. The Admiral nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. Continue normal operations. Make sure they keep seeing helpless primitives who don't understand the danger they're in. Across the fleet, human crews were indeed conducting what appeared to be routine operations. On the Stellar Hawk, Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster supervised what looked like standard maintenance procedures. Her engineering teams were checking power systems, running diagnostic tests, and performing calibrations that seemed entirely normal to alien observers. What the Zephyrians could not detect were the true nature of these operations. Chief Petty Officer Greg Martinez worked deep in the ship's engine room, bringing online systems that had been carefully hidden behind false bulkheads and sensor baffles. The humans had learned long ago that appearing weak was often the best defense against stronger enemies. Power core stable at 98%, Martinez reported to Foster. All secondary systems are green. The quantum resonance chambers are operating within normal parameters. Foster nodded as she checked her own instruments. To alien sensors, the Stellar Hawk appeared to be running a simple fusion reactor barely capable of interstellar travel. In reality, the ship was powered by technology that the Zephyrian Empire could not even imagine on the Thunder Bay. Captain Helen Parker reviewed the final preparations with her tactical officer. Their weapon systems showed as primitive projectile cannons to enemy scans, but the reality was far different. The ship's main armament consisted of relativistic, kinetic impactors capable of accelerating matter to significant fractions of light. Speed, ma'am, the fabrication units have completed production of the final ammunition loads, her weapons officer reported. All targeting computers are synchronized with fleet tactical networks. We're ready for whatever they throw at us, Parker smiled as she watched the alien fleet through her ship's main viewer. The Zephyrians had positioned themselves in perfect formation for what they believed would be a simple extermination operation. They had no idea they were about to face technology that would make their weapons look like children's toys. The Phoenix Rising conducted its own preparations under the command of Commander Jake Robinson, his navigation officer, Lieutenant Lisa Green worked at her station making what appeared to be routine course corrections. In reality, she was programming evasion patterns based on detailed analysis of Zephyrian firing solutions. Commander, the enemy fleet is maintaining standard Imperial formation, Green reported. Their tactical computers are running predictable targeting algorithms. We should be able to anticipate their firing patterns with 97% accuracy, Robinson nodded as he studied the tactical display. The aliens were so confident in their technological superiority that they were broadcasting their intentions with every movement. It was almost too easy back aboard the Dominion's Wrath. Admiral Morrison was growing increasingly frustrated with his inability to understand human behavior. His science officers had analyzed every piece of data they could gather, but the humans continued to act as if they were unaware of their impending doom, Admiral. His communications officer reported, "The humans are broadcasting music again. The same primitive songs they played yesterday." Morrison listened to the strange melodies coming from the human fleet. The song spoke of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, of standing up to bullies or fighting against impossible circumstances. The aliens interpreted this as the desperate bravado of a doomed species. What they did not understand was that these songs carried coded messages between human ships. Each melody contained tactical information, status updates, and coordination. Signals that looked like nothing more than primitive entertainment to alien listeners. Captain Sam Davis of the Arctic Volf used the musical broadcasts to synchronize his ship's systems with the rest of the fleet. His crew had been practicing these procedures for months, waiting for exactly this type of encounter. The Zephyrians had provided them with the perfect opportunity to test humanity's true capabilities, sir. All systems show green, his chief engineer reported. The gravity wave generators are operating at peak efficiency. Our defensive screens are ready for deployment on your command, Davis nodded as he watched the enemy fleet through his ship's sensors. The aliens had no idea what they were about to face. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment, developing weapons and defenses that existed far beyond anything in the known galaxy. The second day of the countdown was ending, and both fleets continued their preparations. The Zephyrians spent their time running simulations that confirmed their absolute superiority over primitive human technology. The humans spent their time making final adjustments to systems that would soon revolutionize galactic warfare. Admiral Morrison retired to his quarters confident that the next day would bring another easy victory for the Empire. Fleet Admiral Watson remained on her bridge, knowing that in less than 24 hours the galaxy would discover that humanity was far from the helpless species they appeared to be. The 72-hour deadline had arrived like the dawn of Judgment Day. Admiral Kane Morrison stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath surrounded by his senior officers, all of them watching the countdown timer as it approached zero. The Zephyrian fleet had moved into final attack formation during the night, 500 warships arranged in a perfect sphere around the human vessels. Morrison felt the familiar rush of anticipation that came before every conquest. In moments, he would demonstrate the absolute power of the Galactic Empire to yet another species that had dared to resist Imperial authority. The humans had sealed their fate with their stubborn refusal to surrender. Communications officer, open a channel to the human flagship, Morrison commanded. His voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of unquestioned victory. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the human vessel New Horizon. Fleet Admiral Claire Watson appeared exactly as she had 3 days ago, wearing the same calm expression that had puzzled Morrison throughout this encounter. What disturbed him most was that she was still smiling. Admiral Morrison, Watson said, her voice as steady as if she were discussing the weather rather than facing imminent destruction. I trust you slept well? We have prepared our final response to your generous offer. Morrison leaned forward in his command chair, expecting to finally hear the desperate pleas for mercy that always came at this moment. Every species eventually broke when faced with the reality of Imperial power. These humans would be no different. Speak quickly, Morrison replied, his tone sharp with impatience. Your time has expired. Surrender now or face the consequences of your defiance. Watson's smile grew wider, and for the first time in his long military career, Admiral Morrison felt a chill of uncertainty run down his spine. There was something in the human's eyes that spoke of hidden knowledge, of secrets waiting to be revealed. "Admiral, we have considered your proposal very carefully," Watson said, her words measured and deliberate. "After extensive discussion among our leadership, we must respectfully decline your generous offer of slavery. We prefer to remain free." The words hit Morrison like a physical blow. No species had ever rejected imperial mercy when offered a chance to surrender. The humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and Morrison was beginning to suspect it might be the former. "Then you have chosen extinction," Morrison declared, his voice booming across the bridge. "All ships, prepare to fire. These primitives will serve as an example to any other species that dares to defy the Empire." What happened next would be remembered in galactic history as the moment everything changed. Watson raised her hand in what appeared to be a casual gesture, but Morrison noticed that her smile had transformed into something that looked almost predatory. "Captain Parker, you may begin," Watson said calmly on the bridge of the Thunder Bay. Captain Helen Parker had been waiting for those exact words. She turned to her tactical officer with the kind of smile that had made her legendary among Terran Fleet Command. "Initiate first contact protocols," Parker ordered. "Let our friends see who they're really dealing with." Across the human fleet, ships that had appeared small and primitive suddenly began to change. What the Zephyrians had assumed were simple hull plates started to shift and reconfigure, revealing weapon ports that had been hidden behind adaptive camouflage. Energy signatures that had registered as weak fusion reactors suddenly spiked to levels that made Zephyrian sensors scream warnings. Commander Jake Robinson aboard the Phoenix Rising watched his tactical display as the fleet transformation commenced. Lieutenant Lisa Green worked frantically at her navigation console as the ship's true systems came online for the first time in years. "Ma'am, all stealth systems are disengaging," Green reported, her voice tight with excitement. "Quantum field generators are stable. Relativistic drive cores are online and ready." Robinson nodded as he felt the familiar hum of advanced technology awakening around him. The Phoenix Rising had spent 3 years disguised as a simple patrol vessel, but now it was revealing its true nature as one of the most sophisticated warships ever constructed on the Arctic Vault. Captain Sam Davis watched his engineering displays as Chief Engineer Greg Martinez brought the ship's primary weapons online. What had appeared to be simple kinetic cannons were actually relativistic mass drivers capable of accelerating projectiles to significant fractions of light speed, sir. "The gravity wave generators are operating at full capacity," Martinez reported. "From the engine room, defensive screens are deploying. All weapon systems show green across the board." Davis turned to his tactical officer with anticipation. "Target the largest Zephyrian dreadnought. Let's give them a demonstration, though." Never forget, Admiral Morrison stared at his tactical display in growing horror as the human ships transformed before his eyes. Energy readings that had been barely detectable were now off the scale. Weapon signatures that his computers had classified as primitive were suddenly showing power levels that exceeded anything in the Imperial Arsenal science officer. "Report?" Morrison demanded, his voice cracking with the first hints of panic. "Admiral, our sensors must be malfunctioning," the science officer replied, his hands shaking as he worked his console. "The readings we're getting from the human fleet are impossible. Their energy output has increased by a factor of 10,000. Their weapon signatures are unlike anything in our database." Subcommander Vrex approached Morrison's chair with a data tablet, his scaled face pale with shock. "Sir, the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. They're sending tactical data to each other using quantum entanglement communication." "That technology is supposed to be theoretical," Morrison felt, his world collapsing around him as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. The humans had not been preparing for defeat during the past 3 days. They had been preparing to reveal their true strength to an enemy that had underestimated them completely. On the Stellar Hawk, Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster coordinated with her engineering team as the ship's advanced systems powered up for the first time in combat conditions. Chief Petty Officer Martinez monitored quantum resonance chambers that were producing energy levels beyond anything the Zephyrian Empire had ever achieved, ma'am. All primary systems are online, Martinez reported. The temporal distortion field? Generators are stable. Quantum torpedo launchers are loaded and ready to fire. Foster smiled as she watched the alien fleet through her ship's enhanced sensors. The Zephyrians were about to learn that humanity had not spent the past century developing better entertainment systems and faster food delivery. They had been preparing for this exact moment. Fleet Admiral Watson opened communications to the entire Zephyrian fleet, her image appearing on every enemy ship simultaneously. The calm smile had been replaced by an expression of deadly seriousness that made Admiral Morrison's blood freeze. Admiral Morrison and officers of the Zephyrian fleet, Watson began, her voice carrying clearly across space. You have made the mistake of assuming that a small fleet means a weak fleet. You have confused our preference for peace with an inability to defend ourselves. Allow us to correct these misconceptions. Captain Ryan Peters of the Iron Wolf was among the first to open fire, his ship's main battery sending a stream of relativistic projectiles toward the nearest Zephyrian dreadnought. The aliens watched in disbelief as their supposedly impenetrable shields collapsed under impacts that struck with the force of Small Star's commander. Beth Collins of the Storm Chaser followed with her own weapons, quantum-enhanced energy beams that passed through Zephyrian armor as if it were made of paper. The alien vessel she targeted simply ceased to exist, its atoms scattered across space by forces that defied Imperial understanding of physics. Captain Nick Sullivan of the Valiant Dawn coordinated with the fleet's tactical network to target multiple enemy ships simultaneously. His weapons officer reported target locks on 17 different vessels, each one about to discover that humanity had developed warfare into an art form. Fire, Sullivan ordered calmly the Zephyrian fleet, which had dominated the galaxy for centuries, through superior technology and overwhelming force, suddenly found itself facing weapons that made their own arsenal look like children's toys. Ships that had been considered invincible were being destroyed by what they had assumed were primitive vessels crewed by backward aliens. Admiral Morrison watched his tactical display as red warning lights filled his bridge and damage reports flooded in from across his fleet. In less than 60 seconds, the humans had destroyed or crippled nearly 50 Zephyrian warships without suffering a single casualty themselves. Impossible, Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible over the alarms, screaming throughout his ship. This cannot be happening. The battle that Admiral Morrison had expected to last 4 minutes was now entering its 10th minute, and the Zephyrian fleet was being systematically destroyed by weapons they could not understand or defend against. The Bridge of the Dominions. Roth shook violently as another wave of human projectiles struck their shields, each impact draining power reserves that should have been sufficient to fight for hours. Morrison gripped his command chair as sparks flew from overloaded consoles. Around him, his tactical officer was shouting damage reports that painted a picture of absolute disaster. 40% of the Imperial fleet had been destroyed or disabled. While the humans had not lost a single vessel, Admiral, our shields are down to 30%. His chief engineer reported over the ship's communication system. The quantum torpedoes are draining our power faster than we can regenerate it. These weapons should not exist. Morrison stared at his tactical display in disbelief as another group of Zephyrian dreadnoughts simply vanished from the screen. The human weapons were unlike anything in the Imperial database. Projectiles that moved at impossible speeds, energy beams that ignored defensive systems, and explosive devices that seemed to tear holes in space itself. On the human side of the battle, Captain Sam Davis of the Arctic Wolf was coordinating his ship's fire with the rest of the fleet through quantum communication networks that operated faster than light itself. His targeting computer had identified the Zephyrian flagship and was calculating the optimal firing solution. Chief Martinez, are the gravity wave generators ready for full discharge? Davis asked his chief engineer. Yes, sir, all systems show optimal performance, Martinez replied from the engine room. The gravitational distortion field is stable and ready to deploy on your command. Davis smiled as he watched the alien flagship through his enhanced sensors. The Zephyrians were about to experience weapons technology that turned their understanding of physics upside down. Fire gravity pulse. Davis ordered the Arctic Volf unleashed a weapon that existed only in theoretical papers until humanity had made it reality. A concentrated burst of gravitational waves struck the Dominion's Wrath with forces that warped space around the massive alien vessel. The Zephyrian shields, designed to stop energy weapons and physical projectiles, offered no protection against an attack that used gravity itself as a weapon. Admiral Morrison felt his ship twist and buckle as impossible forces tore at its hull. Emergency systems screamed warnings about structural failure while his crew struggled to understand what was happening to them. Science officer, what are they doing to us? Morrison demanded. I don't know, Admiral, the science officer replied, his voice shaking with terror. Our sensors show gravitational anomalies that shouldn't be possible. They're using gravity as a weapon. Our science says this cannot be done. Meanwhile, Commander Rachel Torres of the Midnight Sun was demonstrating another aspect of human technological superiority. Her ship's quantum disruptors were weapons that attacked matter at the subatomic level, causing molecular bonds to simply stop working. Target the enemy cruiser formation. Torres ordered her weapons officer. Full dispersal pattern. The quantum disruptors fired streams of energy that looked almost harmless compared to the massive plasma cannons of the Zephyrian fleet. But when the beams struck their targets, entire sections of alien warships simply crumbled into component atoms. Hulls that had been forged from the strongest materials in the galaxy became clouds of scattered particles. Captain Tony Mitchell of the Golden Eagle was using his ship's temporal distortion fields to create pockets of accelerated time around Zephyrian vessels. Enemy ships found themselves aging decades in seconds as their own entropy was weaponized against them. Sir, the enemy dreadnought is showing signs of rapid decay, his tactical officer reported. Their hull plating is corroding at an accelerated rate. Their power systems are failing as components age beyond their operational limits. Mitchell nodded with satisfaction as he watched the alien warship fall apart from within. Target the next vessel in line. Let's see how well their armor holds. Up to a few centuries of wear, the Zephyrian fleet was discovering that humanity had not simply developed better versions of existing weapons. They had created entirely new forms of warfare that attacked the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Every ship that engaged the humans found itself facing weapons that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Commander Vrex approached Admiral Morrison with another data tablet filled with sensor readings that made no sense according to Imperial science. His hands were shaking as he tried to process information that his training said was impossible. Admiral, the humans are using technologies that our best scientists claim cannot exist, Vrex reported. Weapons that manipulate gravity, devices that alter the flow of time, energy beams that dissolve matter at the quantum level. How is this possible? Morrison had no answer. In 300 years of conquest, the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered a species with technology that exceeded their own. They had built their entire military doctrine around the assumption of technological superiority, and now that assumption was proving catastrophically wrong. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim aboard the Stardancer was coordinating the fleet's defensive systems while her ship's advanced sensors tracked every movement of the remaining Zephyrian vessels. The human fleet was operating with a level of tactical coordination that seemed almost telepathic to the aliens. Ma'am, the enemy is attempting to retreat, her navigation officer reported. Their remaining ships are trying to break formation and escape to hyperspace. Kim smiled as she watched the alien vessels desperately trying to flee the battle. They had started with such confidence. Inform Fleet Admiral Watson that the fish are trying to leave the net. Captain Ellen Brooks of the Nova Spirit was among the ships tasked with preventing the Zephyrian retreat. Her vessel's interdiction field generators created zones of distorted space that made hyperspace travel impossible. Deploy interdiction fields around the fleeing vessels, Brooks ordered. No one leaves until the Admiral says they can leave. The Zephyrian ships found themselves trapped in normal space as human technology created barriers that their hyperspace drives could not penetrate. ships that had been designed to dominate, through superior mobility, were suddenly as helpless as insects caught in amber. Admiral Morrison watched in growing despair as his escape routes were systematically cut off by human vessels that seemed to anticipate his every move. The tactical computer that had predicted easy victory was now showing probability calculations that made his stomach turn. "Admiral, we have lost 68% of our fleet," his tactical officer reported. "Our remaining ships are scattered and unable to coordinate effective resistance. We are completely outmatched." Morrison stared at the tactical display showing the remnants of what had been the most powerful fleet in Zephyrian history. Red icons marking destroyed or disabled vessels filled the screen, while green markers showing human ships remained unchanged from the beginning of the battle. On the bridge of New Horizon, Fleet Admiral Watson was receiving status reports from her ship commanders. The battle was proceeding exactly as the Terran Defense Council had planned, with human casualties remaining at 0 while the alien fleet was being methodically dismantled. "Admiral, the enemy flagship is requesting communication," her communications officer reported. Watson smiled as she looked at the tactical display. The Zephyrian fleet that had arrived 3 days ago with such arrogance was now a broken collection of damaged vessels desperately seeking any way to escape the consequences of their aggression. "Put Admiral Morrison on screen," Watson ordered. "I think it's time we had another conversation." The main viewer showed the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, where Admiral Morrison sat slumped in his command chair surrounded by smoke and sparking consoles. The confident predator who had delivered his ultimatum 3 days ago was gone, replaced by a beaten commander who had finally understood that he was facing something far beyond his experience. "Fleet Admiral Watson," Morrison said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I request permission to withdraw my remaining forces. We did not understand what we were facing." Watson's expression remained calm as she studied the alien commander, who had threatened to destroy humanity. "Admiral Morrison, I'm afraid the time for withdrawal passed when you opened fire on my ships. We have some things to discuss." The silence that followed Admiral Morrison's request for withdrawal stretched across space like a held breath. On the bridge of New Horizon, Fleet Admiral Watson studied the broken Zephyrian commander through her main viewer while her tactical officers waited for orders. The alien fleet that had arrived with such arrogance was now reduced to less than 200 damaged vessels scattered across the Sol system. Watson turned to her communications officer with the same calm expression she had worn throughout this encounter. "Open a fleet-wide channel. I want every surviving Zephyrian to hear what I'm about to say." The channel activated, connecting Watson's voice to every alien ship still capable of receiving transmissions. Across the scattered remnants of the Imperial fleet, Zephyrian crews stopped their desperate damage control efforts to listen to the human, who had just shattered their understanding of galactic power. "Officers and crew of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire," Watson began, her voice carrying clearly through space. 3 days ago, you arrived in our system with threats of destruction and demands for surrender. You assumed that our small fleet meant we were weak. You confused our preference for peace with an inability to defend ourselves. Today you have learned the difference between appearing weak and being weak. Admiral Morrison listened to Watson's words while emergency crews worked frantically around his damaged bridge. His ship's life support systems were failing, half his crew was dead or injured, and his once mighty fleet was reduced to floating wreckage. The human's calm tone made the defeat even more humiliating. Watson continued her address to the surviving aliens. "For 3 centuries, your empire has conquered through intimidation and overwhelming force. You attack species that cannot defend themselves and call it victory. You have built your entire civilization on the suffering of others. Today that ends." Captain Lucas Bryant of the Liberty's Edge monitored the alien communications as Watson spoke. The Zephyrian survivors were sending desperate messages to their homeworlds, trying to explain how their invincible fleet had been destroyed by what they still thought of as primitive humans. Most of their reports were being dismissed as impossible by Imperial Command. "Admiral Morrison," Watson said, addressing the alien commander directly, "you wanted to see our response to your ultimatum. Allow me to explain exactly what you have encountered today. Morrison forced himself to sit upright in his damaged command chair as Watson's image filled his screen. The human's expression had shifted from calm amusement to something that resembled a teacher, explaining a lesson to a particularly slow student. "The ships you attacked are not our military fleet," Watson continued. "They are patrol vessels, designed for exploration and peaceful contact with other species. Our actual war fleet consists of vessels that would make these ships look like toys. The weapons you experience today are our defensive systems, not our offensive capabilities." The words hit Morrison like physical blows as he realized the true scope of his mistake. If these patrol vessels could destroy his entire fleet, what could humanity's real military do? To the Zephyrian Empire Subcommander Vrex approached Morrison's chair with a data tablet containing the latest sensor readings from the human fleet. His scaled hands were shaking as he presented the information that confirmed their worst fears. "Admiral, our sensors are detecting massive energy signatures from beyond the outer planets," Vrex reported. "The humans have additional fleets moving toward our position. Ships that are registering power levels 10 times greater than what we just faced." Morrison stared at the tactical display as new contacts appeared at the edge of the system. The human reinforcements were approaching slowly, almost casually, as if they were arriving for a parade rather than a battle. The message was clear. Humanity was not threatened by the Zephyrian Presence Fleet. Admiral Watson allowed the aliens to process this information before continuing her explanation. "Your empire rules through fear because you have never encountered a species that could resist you. You mistake the absence of resistance for the absence of capability. Today you have learned that some species choose not to fight because they are confident they can win when fighting becomes necessary." Captain Ryan Peters of the Iron Wolf was among the human commanders coordinating the arrival of reinforcements. The new ships entering the system were vessels from humanity's Deep Space Defense Command, warships designed specifically for fighting enemies with superior numbers. "Sir, the heavy cruisers are reporting ready for combat operations," Peters' tactical officer informed him. "Their quantum lance batteries are fully charged and targeting solutions are locked on the remaining alien vessels." Peters nodded as he watched the Zephyrian survivors through his sensors. The aliens were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their error. "Hold position and maintain targeting locks. Let them think about what they've learned." On the Storm Chaser, Commander Beth Collins was receiving updated intelligence reports about the Zephyrian Empire's reaction to the battle. Imperial Command was dismissing the initial reports as impossible, but additional messages were beginning to paint a picture that even their arrogance could not ignore. "Ma'am, our deep space monitoring stations are intercepting Zephyrian communications," her intelligence officer reported. "Their high command is ordering additional fleets to investigate what happened here. They still don't believe a human patrol group could defeat their best ships." Collins smiled as she reviewed the intelligence data. The Zephyrian Empire was about to make their situation much worse by sending more ships to be destroyed. "Forward this information to Fleet Admiral Watson. She wants to know how many more lessons we'll need to teach." Admiral Morrison forced himself to speak despite the crushing weight of defeat pressing down on him. "Fleet Admiral Watson, what do you want from us? Name your terms for our surrender." Watson's expression showed something that might have been pity as she looked at the broken alien commander. "Admiral, you misunderstand the situation. We are not interested in your surrender. We are not interested in conquering your empire or enslaving your people. We simply want you to leave our space and never return." The concept was so alien to Zephyrian, thinking that Morrison struggled to process it. Every species the Empire had encountered either surrendered or was destroyed. The idea of a victor who wanted nothing more than to be left alone was beyond his comprehension. "However," Watson continued, "we need to ensure that your empire understands the consequences of future aggression against humanity or any other peaceful species. Captain Mitchell, please escort the surviving Zephyrian vessels to the edge of our system." Captain Tony Mitchell of the Golden Eagle acknowledged the order and moved his ship toward the scattered alien survivors. His vessel's temporal distortion Fields created visible waves in space that reminded the Zephyrians of weapons they could not defend against Admiral Morrison. "You will return to your empire with a message," Watson said. "Tell your leaders that humanity exists, that we are not interested in conquest or expansion, but that any future threats against us or our allies will be met with increasingly creative responses." Morrison nodded weakly as he tried to imagine explaining this disaster to the Zephyrian High Command. How could he describe weapons that violated the laws of physics or an enemy that possessed technology centuries beyond Imperial capabilities? "Sir, the humans are allowing us to retrieve our escape pods and survivors," Vex reported. "They're even providing medical assistance to our wounded." This final act of mercy was perhaps the most devastating blow to Morrison's understanding of warfare. The humans were treating their defeated enemies with more compassion than the Zephyrian Empire showed its own allies as the surviving alien vessels began their humiliating retreat toward the edge of the system. Watson opened a final communication to Admiral Morrison. "Admiral, you came here expecting to find a weak species ready for conquest. Instead, you found a people who value peace but are prepared for war. Remember this lesson and share it with your empire." Morrison watched through his damaged sensors. As the human fleet returned to their patrol patterns, their ships resuming the disguised configurations that had fooled him so completely. Within hours, any alien scanning the Sol system would see the same primitive vessels that had lured his fleet into disaster. The surviving Zephyrian ships limped toward the hyperspace jump point while human vessels escorted them like shepherds guiding lost sheep. Behind them, the wreckage of what had been the Empire's most powerful fleet served as a monument to the dangers of underestimating an opponent. Admiral Morrison began composing his report to the Zephyrian High Command, knowing that his military career was over and his empire's expansion had encountered its first immovable barrier. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity was no longer hiding among the stars. Fleet Admiral Watson returned to her ready room aboard New Horizon, satisfied that the message had been delivered clearly. The Zephyrian Empire would think twice before threatening any peaceful species, and other aggressive civilizations would soon learn that humanity was watching from the shadows. The Sol system returned to its peaceful routine as human ships resumed their normal operations, but the galaxy would never be quite the same. Word would spread through trading networks and diplomatic channels.